Did you see the stylish?
Welcome to the Young IPA podcast. I'm James. This is Pete.
G'day, everyone.
It is episode 194. We got two big interviews today. We have got Joey Hildebrand, News Corp columnist. We're going to be talking to him about his article in news.com.au last week, which everyone should go check out, talking about Joel Fitzgibbon's resignation from Labor's frontbench, what that means for Labor going forward, and how, you know, it basically exacerbates all this tension between old Labor, working class values, trying to make sure people, improve their lives, versus new Labor, woke, climate change, stuff like that. So that is, it's a fun interview. It's a loose interview. I get changed halfway through, so stick around for that. That's a visual treat for the people watching on YouTube.
Not on screen. Just to clarify.
And we are also talking to Caroline Di Russo, who is a Sky News contributor. People would have definitely seen her on Sky News. We're going to be talking to her because she's a Western Australian. Western Australia's hard border closures under the microscope this week. We're going to be talking to her about that. So two fun interviews coming up. Pete, what are you looking forward to in the show today?
Well, definitely great to speak to Joe. I think Joe, back in the day, was probably our first sort of external interview, and then he was back on the show this week, which was great. And he dropped a few naughty words, which we had to bleep out. That's all right. That's Joe. Or a wife beater. So it was a really fun interview. Check that out. And of course, right at the end of the show, we're going to talk about one of my favourite facts in the world, James. I don't want to give it away now, but one of my favourite things about the world we're going to discuss in the final bit of the show. So wait for it.
All right, I'm looking forward to that. All right, so let's talk about the main news story in Australia this week, and that is this growing cluster in South Australia and what that means for basically Christmases all over Australia, and also obviously whether or not South Australia is going to get into lockdown. So as we're recording this, people might listen to the show later in the week. We're recording on Tuesday. At the moment, there's 20 cases and only one new overnight. And a vast majority of the cases are linked to one single family, which is, good in a sense because it shows that people know where the cases are. But this still could change 15 different directions, and various state governments have already made some big sweeping changes to policies about travel. So I think we'll start off with what this means for South Australia, Pete, because Victoria's just coming out of lockdown. No other state's been back into lockdown since that first wave, but now the rumours are starting that South Australia might go back if this continues to grow.
Yeah, my heart just absolutely sunk for the people of South Australia yesterday when it came out that there was this cluster. Thank God, so far it looks like there's only been one new one overnight, but as you mentioned, that can change quickly. But hopefully it doesn't. Hopefully they have got it under control. But anyway, as you mentioned, there's already been changes brought in overnight. They've closed gyms, recreation centres, trampoline and play cafes. James, community sports fixtures have been postponed. Funerals have been capped at 50 mourners. Weddings, you have to register your details. Private gatherings, etc. Anyway, so they've already, I won't go through them all, they're all on the internet. It's already been brought in that there's been a number of changes made. So, having been through what we've been through, James, I just hope it doesn't go any further.
Well, here we go, because that is what South Australia has done off 17 new cases. Out of a population of over 2 million in the state, 17 new cases can bring that level of tumultuousness to people's plans, to people's freedoms, to people's businesses. This is what elimination strategy brings you. If you don't trust your own contact tracing team and you don't trust your own hospital systems to be able to manage any outbreaks effectively, and everyone always says there's going to be other outbreaks, there's going to be more outbreaks, but then when they actually come, everyone just straight up panics and closes as much as they can after 17 cases.
Yeah, they've had absolute, months and months and months to improve.
Sorry, it's 20 now, but it was 20 now, but when those announcements were made, it was at 17.
Yeah, exactly right. So they've had months and months and months to work this out. They get their contact tracing up to date. We should point out the things that they've brought in are not like a total lockdown or anything like that. But this is definitely something they should be able to, contact trace the way New South Wales were able to do. They've already accepted help from the federal government, which we know that the Victorian government famously didn't do because, I guess, certain people wanted to be in charge and didn't want to accept help from a Liberal Prime Minister. So that at least has happened. There's got to be a way to look after this without shutting everything down, and they have increased testing over the last little bit. So hopefully that's what happens. And also the priority, like Stephen Marshall, the Premier of South Australia, has already come out and said, we will do whatever it takes to stop this. We'll throw We'll throw whatever we need to at this, but it's like, a report came out in the Australian this morning about how 160,000 kids between year 8 and year 10 in Victoria missed 22 weeks of school, and there's this absolute mental health. As they return to school, they're finding that actually the mental health issues haven't started improving yet, and a lot of kids have got a lot of anxiety about returning to school. We made a decision to put older people ahead of younger people all around the world, and certainly in Victoria. And when the Premier comes out and says we're going to do whatever it takes, it's like, well, are you really going to do stuff like that? Are you really going to put the welfare of adults ahead of the welfare of children? So hopefully that's just talk, and hopefully they're able to sort of stay open as far as possible. But we have to be aware that there are other things in life apart from just not dying of COVID.
Yeah, Pete saying the word hopefully, and it remains to be seen a lot, holding on to that little bit of hope, which as Victorians learned in second lockdown, never use hope as a guiding principle of what's going to happen, because always expect the most draconian restrictions just so state premiers can walk up to National Cabinet with a fresh 0 on their score sheet. Anyway, the other stats that I want to get through. So in the first set of lockdowns, when the nation was locked down as one, 43,000 South Australians lost their jobs. And South Australia already has the lowest percentage of its population who has a job out of all the mainland states. So you think about what a second lockdown would do to that. Again, 20 cases what we're at. So 43 have already lost their job. 43,000 already lost their jobs. Some are starting to get them back. I mean, as IPA researchers have been showing, this whole we're going to bounce back immediately. That is not actually happening. There's still all these job losses in small businesses, even in open up states. But anyway, so 43,000 people are starting to get their jobs back. If a second lockdown comes across, not only do they go straight back onto JobSeeker and JobKeeper, other jobs may follow as well. And this is an absolute travesty for people that have worked so hard, sacrificed so much for a state government to lose so much calmness after just 20 cases. And Evan Mulholland, friend of the show, friend of the communications director here at the IPA, was on Paul Murray Live last night, basically calling for, look, this is the problem with JobSeeker and JobKeeper, which were good policies and they should have been implemented, but it does give state premiers this safety net of just going, oh, well, the federal government's going to pay for all these jobs that we're going to be sacrificing out of this health gig. So if the state premiers are able to start footing some of the bill, maybe we won't see this level of panic.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, we talk about it all the time about how the state governments, not just in COVID policy, but on a range of things, they make all these policies, but they don't have the responsibility of actually raising the money to pay for them, which the federal government does. So that's an ongoing problem with Australia's federal system. The other point about this, James, is that already you can see Marshall, the Premier of South Australia, trying to sort of blame the people of South Australia. He said, let me just get the quote up. Sorry, I haven't quite got it on the page yet.
Oh, he goes, I think many South Australians might have been becoming complacent over the week on 5AA
very good,
radio.
James.
Yeah.
Very, very good. That's what I need you here for. Yeah, so which is like, hang on, mate, this is a failure of hotel quarantine. Someone in the hotel got it, and it sounds like it was reasonably unlucky that they got it. But,
yeah, they didn't even, the report is that they didn't even come into contact with someone from, who was in hotel quarantine. It was just somehow passed among them, maybe on a dish or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wouldn't even say it's a failure of hotel quarantine. I think it's just the reality of we are living with a very contagious virus, and this is going to happen, and you don't need a finger point and you don't need a lockdown. You just need to make sure contact tracing works and make sure your hospital systems are able to treat patients.
That's right. That's exactly right. So to suddenly start blaming the people of South Australia is completely unfair. And I know for a fact that was one of the things here in Victoria that was really like, I cannot believe you're blaming this on us. So I would not do that. Now, the main thing for me, well, not the main thing for me, James, because this is a very important issue, but one of the issues, unfortunately for me, is the dreaded vertical consumption is back in terms of the word vertical consumption, the actual act of vertical consumption, which of course it means standing up.
I forgot about this. I was thinking it was like this serious economics point that you were going to bring up, and I had to adjust my seating position to get big brain. But no, we're talking drinking.
Well, it is serious, James, and that, as we talked about a few weeks ago on the show, that South Australia brought back in vertical consumption, which of course means drinking standing up, which was an outrageous that they gave it this scientific term. Anyway, it's been banned now, so double tragedy. It's been banned, and they're still throwing around that term, even though I said they shouldn't be. So another issue that the people of South Australia have to deal with.
So we're going to get the other part of this is the response of other states. So the idea that all states should be open by Christmas and that everyone's Christmas plans should be able to go forward has long been this push by Scott Morrison and push by National Cabinet. We could talk about this with Caroline Di Russo later in the show. But here's what happened. So this is outbreak again. This is we're at 20 cases. So that's all we're at. We're at 20 cases right now. And immediately on the news that the cluster was coming out, immediately Western Australia put up their borders again, no surprise. Queensland said parts of South Australia you can't come in. Northern Territory, South Australia, Victoria, they've all said, okay, if you are coming in from South Australia, here are the restrictions. Now, again, we're going to have outbreaks, and it's borderline inhumane because so many people would have absolutely no confidence in booking to see family over Christmas or booking to go anywhere, because how can you tell that a state border is going to be open? How can you tell that any of your plans are going to be met? Because a state premier might just go, okay, there's, maybe it's 15 cases. We've had 0. This other state's got 15. Border closed. Bad luck.
Yeah, and there's even like, there's sort of people not being able to see their family, but there's really tragic circumstances of people not being able to see relatives who are dying and things like that. It sort of goes to this whole thing that the state premiers or all governments really in Australia have made like Covert Deaths the only thing that matters, and there's nothing else but
not even Covert Deaths, it's just new cases. Yeah. And the second it gets to 10, we're in panic stations.
Yeah, just COVID. Yeah, so just COVID. It's the only thing that matters. They've created this idea that this is the only thing we need to be worried about. And once you've done that, it's hard to then go, oh no, a bit of COVID's okay. So, they've created this situation. I know that Dan Andrews has left the borders open with South Australia, which is, credit where it's due, James.
Parts of South Australia. Parts of Australia. Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay.
The only one that's like still fully open is New South Wales and the ACT.
Well, there you go. So cancel that. Anyway, I did notice that he offered to help, give South Australia any help they might need. I just reckon you might sit this one out, big guy.
From Victorians, you don't want that, because he's going to say, see, this particular freedom here, get rid of that one as well. Like, that's his only contribution to the meeting. Was like, wait, you're letting them do this? No.
How long are you letting them exercise for?
A 9:05 walk? No, that can't be doing.
No, exactly right. So, I saw that. But, interesting times, James. And obviously, by the time many people listen to this, the situation might have changed.
Yeah, I mean, by next episode, South Australia might be back in full lockdown. So hopefully not, and you don't want to go through that. And again, it's only 20 cases at the moment. But yeah, it's signalling to the rest of Australia that you have no faith in your state's contact tracing team anytime this happens. If 20 is panic stations, what have you guys been doing at contact tracing for 6 months?
Yeah, and especially, and South Australia has barely had any. They've only had 4 deaths in total. So it's like, they've basically had a lot of clear air to sort this out and to have a good response to it. Anyway, maybe they have. Let's not bag them before it's actually happened.
All right, another story. This one didn't get as much attention as I reckon it should have, because it is scary. So this comes across like basically in this idea of these national registrations and making sure people's movements are being tracked, and also like around the vaccine and stuff like that. But basically, one of the ideas that's being floated in this federal registry of where people are going, making sure they're not being exposed to COVID, is this idea that credit card payments will be used to track visits to coronavirus hotspots while people have to provide contact details. This is really, really concerning. The federal government might be able to check through your credit card where you've been, and people might go, okay, well, I'm already registering for a cafe, and these are the details that I want to give this cafe just so I can sit down. But again, like, this is the lesson with people's personal data being given to the government. It is not just who you think you're giving it to, it's all these other ones. I mean, when metadata was just supposed to be catching terrorists. That was the only thing it was supposed to be doing. And then the IPA released all those agencies that have requested access to metadata, including a fishery service in Western Australia. They said, okay, we need access to people's metadata. So you don't know who's going to be viewing this. And if you start handing over your credit card details, maybe the Australian Tax Office wants to have a look at that. Maybe these other people want to have a look at that. And you just think, wait, exactly who needs to know what I'm using my credit card for and where?
Yeah, I never knew that WA fisheries people got access to the metadata, James. That's an interesting point. That's a real worry. Yeah, well, this is the same thing we talk about with every time that we want the government to collect more data. It creates these silos that people can There's silos of information that people can access. It doesn't really seem to be necessary. It seems disproportionate in this case. New South Wales, they have used this credit card thing in one instance in New South Wales, but it appears to be only one. So the rest of the contact tracing they're able to do without creating this huge data risk. And, you know, what people's you can tell a lot about people's lives that they might not want you to know from their credit card details. You know, like there's all sorts of situations where people might be purchasing something which tells you something about their life. That, you know, in this day and age when we see hacking takes place all the time and we see reputations get destroyed all the time, we're just creating this problem that down the track, and once again we're falling into this thing of, you know, COVID is the only thing we need to worry about, and then in 10 years' time we find we've got this situation where, you know, all this information is just sitting there and people, you know, suffer from the unintended consequences of that. So, yeah, it's a disproportionate response, and the unintended consequences haven't been thought through, I don't think.
Yeah, it's not just the ministers you need to be worried about with this sort of stuff. I mean, there was the famous cases from the the NSA over in the USA, and they were supposed to only be following terrorists, but then particular NSA agents would just, you know, I wonder what my ex-girlfriend's up to right now. Who's she seeing? Like, that's the kind of stuff you need to be worried about as well. All right.
And foreign powers.
So, yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. So those are the two main stories. We'll now get into heroes and villains. All right, we'll start off with heroes. Grunt the Big Freedom Snort, who has stood up for freedom around the world this week. Pete, take it away.
Well, James, we are reasonably critical of the coalition on this program, but not always, but quite often. Anyway, this week I am making them a hero because Assistant Minister to the Prime Minister and Cabinet Ben Morton has announced that they are rewriting public sector wage policy for the federal bureaucracy. So basically what they're doing, to cut a long story short, they're ensuring that Commonwealth public sector wage rises can no longer exceed wage rises in the private sector, and they're basically going to peg public sector wage growth with private sector wage growth. Now, obviously, there's the economic side of this because government spending is not good for the economy, but it's more important, James, from a moral perspective, because it's a moral issue, the fact that this big chunk of the economy will never get sacked. They get better wages. To be honest, a lot of them don't have to work as hard. They have great conditions than the private sector, but the private sector is literally paying for their wages. So some guy who can't open his cafe to more than like 5 people still has to pay the wages of people whose wages have continued to increase throughout the pandemic. We know that since 14th of March, 605,900 private sector workers have been thrown out of work, while 23,700 public sectors workers have been hired. What people don't seem to realise is they just think, oh, you know, what's that got to do? You know, those two facts don't have anything to do with each other. The private sector people pay the wages of the public sector. It's not the government. The government doesn't make a cent. They make all their money from the private sector. And in this time when the private sector is getting smashed, it's completely immoral that the public sector should continue to get, wage rises. And even without the COVID pandemic, it's immoral. So the coalition, you're my hero this week. To Kean Hussey from the IPA said that we should be also reforming the superannuation contribution that we make to public sector workers. That could be the next step. So they receive 15.4% compared to the private sector of 9.5%. But anyway, coalition is my hero this week.
Very good. All right. My one, we kind of went over this in the border closure chat, but
I can't believe I didn't speak over it, actually.
It's basically Gladys Berejiklian's statement about why she was keeping the border open. You can't shut down borders and disrupt lives every time there's an outbreak and disrupt businesses. We need to have confidence, not just in our own system, but the system in other states to be able to get on top of the virus. Just so refreshing, it's weird. It's so refreshing to hear a premier speak like that, but at the same time, it absolutely should not be refreshing to hear a premier speak like that. Like, this whole concept that, you can't change border policy 3 out of 4 days of the week shouldn't be as mind-blowing as I think it is, but it is.
No, exactly right. And Gladys is right. All the way through, she's been like, look, this is a serious thing. We have to worry about it, but it is not the only thing in the world, and we have to be able to, maintain other parts of our community throughout this. What is that noise?
Oh, controversial. I think that might be your laptop.
Ah.
I think that actually sounds like Gladys Berejiklian.
They're
I think
listening
we're just
in.
hearing
It
from
is
the woman
Gladys.
herself. I think you might have Cortana'd this, what did Gladys Berejiklian say, and it might have Cortana'd a statement.
That is
We're keeping that in, Saul. I'm telling you, we're keeping that in. All right, should we
I
do
reckon they're
villains?
listening to us. What's that? Sorry, your villains, yeah. I can't get over that. Villains. All right. Well, as we know, the fake nudie run. Saul, roll the tape, mate.
As Extinction Rebellion protests enter their 6th day.
So that is the Extinction Rebellion fake nudie run. That's not a real nudie run. Therefore, anyone who has stood up for tyranny and against liberty this week is called the Extinction Rebellion run, fake nudie run villain of the week. James, who's yours?
I can't believe we still use that footage. Anyway, my one this week. So this one, you guys remember a couple of months ago, the Harper's Bazaar letter against cancel culture was signed by all those people talking about how it's so hard to say what you really think on the internet these days. I mean, we on the show covered it, but we were sort of saying how the letter really quoted that it was attacks from both sides of the aisle that was making it harder to express yourselves. Like it was both Trump supporters and the far left. And I'm not saying there aren't Trump supporters looking to cancel people, but I thought that was a bit... it wasn't the strongest statement against cancel culture that I'd ever read in my life. But it is actually starting to have a bit of an effect on people's jobs. So Matthew Yglesias, who people would know from Vox, if you've seen a really cool graph on the internet in the last 4 years, chances are Matthew Yglesias put it together. But anyway, he has now left Vox, and one of the reasons was... he was one of the signatories of the anti-cancel culture letter, which people that worked at Vox said made it an unsafe place to work. So the idea of the revolution eating its own comes to mind, because if you can't even say that I don't like cancel culture, you're not even saying something like, here's a controversial statement that I have and I can't say it. You're just saying like, you know what? I don't like the fact that we're cancelling other people, not even me, we're cancelling other people based off what they're saying. Like, that now is too far for Vox. It's crazy.
That's interesting, that point you raised about the revolution eating its own, because I used to say that all the time. I used to think, oh, yeah, this will just burn itself out. And I haven't heard that for a while. Maybe that's something I should think about a bit more. Do you know what I mean? Because I sort of started to think with all the crazy stuff that's happened this year that maybe the revolution wouldn't eat its own. But, yeah, I guess we should still consider the possibility that cancel culture will collapse underneath its own ridiculousness.
Yeah, they'll cancel every single member of the cancel culture tribe, in which case everyone will have been cancelled. And the only people left standing that have not been cancelled are the single most boring people in the world, because they have no opinion. They just say whatever's popular on the internet at the time.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so that's Vox. That's your villain, is that right?
Yeah, and it just the fact the actor resigned. So anyway, your villain this week, Pete.
My villain, James, is Bates College in Maine. Specifically the spineless, craven, gutless, cowardly response of the administration of Bates College in response to this very confected controversy. Now, they did a photo series on the college's Instagram account about, getting people to vote, and there were 11 photos used, and they were all of neutral or left-leaning political organisations, except for one, James. There was one single person in this photo series who was a Republican, and because of that, this, won't be surprised to hear, this sparked a protest at Bates College, and I kind of don't blame the students, because students always do stupid stuff, right? That's just the nature of being at university. I mean, I blame them
except for our listeners.
Yeah,
of course.
And of course, all college students anywhere in the world should be listening, but yeah, maybe one day they will. Anyway, what happened was. So they had a protest and a rally and all this stuff, but the thing that hurt the most was the apology. Sean Finland, who's a spokesperson for the school, said, "To be clear, that's not where it should stop. I need to do more work. My colleagues need to do more work." So they apologised and then used all this language like, I need to do more work, I need to do better. It's like, it was literally a photo of a Republican and saying, go and vote this weekend or go and vote on Tuesday. And then anyway, the president of the whole joint said it was incredibly insensitive of me to speak out about the election without taking that into account. This guy's name is Spencer. Added harm, fear, and feelings of unsafety inflicted on the Bates community that the election supposedly caused. So the students, for being closed-minded and bigoted, you're partly my villain, but mainly it's the cowardly, craven, gutless college administration, James.
It is saying the quiet part out loud, because so many celebrities and so many people were just saying, hey, get out and vote in November, get out and vote, get out and vote. And It was never like get out and vote even if you're a Republican. It was always get out and vote blue. So they just thought, that it's too obvious if we say it like that. But now that this website has taken down the Trump supporter, it's a bit like, I know what we said about get out and vote, but but not all of them.
Yeah, it wasn't like get
those
out and
people
vote.
over there, they don't need to get out and vote. They can stay home. But you people that lean left, you get out and vote.
Yeah, it wasn't like, get out and vote because democracy's beautiful and it's your inalienable right and, you need to say in your future. It's when you get rid of this orange bloke.
Get it. Orange man bad. All right, that is it for the start of the show. We'll now go to our interviews with Joe and Caroline. Before we do, the Young IPA podcast, obviously brought to you by the Institute of Public Affairs. Head on over to ipa.org.au/join. We've got a bunch of different memberships. We've got Generation Liberty membership if you're a young person or you're at university right now. We've got general membership for all of the other listeners we have out there, and even premium memberships as well. Be a part of Australia's greatest voice for freedom. So head on over to ipa.org.au/join now. All right, let's go to those interviews. Okay, we now welcome on to the podcast News Corp journalist Joey Hildebrand. Check him out. Daily Telegraph, news.com.au, wherever you want. So, Joe, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, guys. How are you?
Yeah, very good. So we wanted to talk to you because you wrote an article for news.com.au and all these other News Corp websites, basically looking at the long-term effects of Joel Fitzgibbon's resignation to the Labor Party. And it was such a good article. Me and Pete really liked it. We want to talk about it. So why don't you give our listeners an idea? Oh, please. So give our listeners an idea. What is the long-term effects of Fitzgibbon's resignation?
Well, I suppose the first thing to understand is that Fitzgibbon's resignation from the front bench is really just a symbolic gesture. It's not, Joel Fitzgibbon's particular workplace arrangements aren't what's at stake here. The point is he's made I suppose, drawn a line in the sand and fired a warning shot to the leadership of the party, or a shot across the bows, if you like, to say that, look, unless we change our rhetoric, especially, and unless we talk about how we're going to implement our policy rather than setting sort of arbitrary targets around climate change, we are going to lose seats. We're going to lose supporters. We're going to lose voters. We're going to lose the working class, which I thought Labor was meant to be representative of. And we are going to lose seats, starting most probably with Joel Fitzgibbon's own seat. So as Paul Keating once said, always back self-interest. It's the only horse that's really trying. But the point is, he's absolutely right. There's little doubt that there is a huge section of the community that was once Labor's traditional blue-collar base that now feels alienated by a lot of the language that's used by perhaps, even if not necessarily always the party leaders themselves, but certainly the people around them, and a lot of people who claim to be supporters of or speak for the Labor Party. You could call it, for the sake of shorthand, you could call it sort of the inner city green left or whatever. And, people get all upset about that. I don't really give a rat's. But it is that kind of woke style of politicking that seems to be more about things like policing language, more like preaching tolerance, often very intolerantly, but preaching diversity, but not tolerating any divergent views. And moving away from the basic bread and butter, which is to improve people's living conditions, their living standards, their wages, and saving their jobs. And that is what Labor was founded on. Labor was founded by a bunch of shearers who were trying to save their jobs and earn a decent living wage. And that is a very, very far cry from where it is at the moment, where it seems more about an ideologically driven party that certainly, I love the party, obviously. I wouldn't be trying to save it if I didn't. But it seems, I know, to a lot of people in the Labor right, to a lot of people in the union movement, and I talk to them every day, and they are, I can't, I just had to delay this because of another phone call from another person. But I've been bombarded by people who are too scared to speak up publicly, Joel Fitzgibbon notwithstanding. So it looks like he's the lone soldier. He is not. Pretty much everyone in the New South Wales right and many others besides are 100% behind him, but they dare not speak up publicly, because this is the whole problem. When you have the hard left of the party dictating an ideological template and saying, if you do not conform to this, then you must be a closet racist or a closet homophobe, or you must be transphobic, or whatever ridiculous thing is in these people's mind, then of course people are going to be scared to speak up. And of course you have a party that is built on solidarity, that is built on unity, where you can scream your head off to people in a caucus meeting or a shadow cabinet meeting or whatever it may be, but you cannot breach cabinet solidarity or caucus solidarity. So you can have an argument, for example, in the caucus room about what your position is, but when that caucus hits the floor of Parliament, you've all got to vote lockstep. So it is a party that punishes disloyalty and that often sees any argument or dispute as disloyalty. And that is why so many people in the party are equally frustrated at Joel Fitzgibbon, and you can sort of understand that. But he's obviously taken the decision that if something big doesn't happen and party doesn't change its ways soon, frankly, it will die. It will never win government nationally in our lifetimes.
Joe, the problem you set out then is kind of one that's facing centre-left parties around the world. You can see it with the Democrats and you can see it with Labor in the UK. You're obviously, as you mentioned, a big supporter of Labor. Is it possible to keep both sides happy? Can Labor keep both sides happy, or does one side or the other have to win? What's the long-term solution to this?
I think it's always been, it's ever since Whitlam, I suppose, there's been this tension between the sort of university-educated, progressive, quote-unquote, inner city Labor left and the working class union-based right, and the union-based right has always had the numbers, and that's been Labor's saving grace. If what we've seen recently, and Whitlam, for all the left love him, was a member of the right, let's not forget, and was often keeping his own sort of more extremist elements at bay. What we've seen recently, and again, the golden age of Labor, there's this sense that Labor is the natural party of government. So it's worth noting very quickly here, Labor has only ever had one period in government of more than 2 terms, and that was under Hawke and Keating. Every other time, they've either themselves up or gone too far in one direction or another. So we talk about, Gough Whitlam, the shining aberration. The bloke was only around for 3 years. I'm not sure if he even clocked up the full 36 months. And then he went, and the dismissal, that was outrageous. But people also forget that he was voted out in an absolute landslide a month after that. And then he was voted out again, or rather, as opposition leader when he recontested in 77, he got smashed in a landslide again. So the idea that he is the one true leader to lead us out of here. When you had Curtin and Chifley, so that was a big block of Labor, I should say. I'm talking about the post-war era, obviously. But you have Curtin and Chifley. What happened with Chifley? He tried to nationalise the banks, and we all know what happened next. Again, when Labor goes too far to the left, it gets punished. Coming back to the post-war era, again, there's only been one time that Labor has won more than 2 terms of government. That is under Hawke Keating. That was when both men were absolute card-carrying members of the right. Keating, of course, was the godfather of the New South Wales right. Both were under the tutelage of the mercurial and pragmatic Graham Richardson. And that was how Labor won. And it won in 83, 84, 87, 90, 93. Bang, 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 bang. 5 elections on the trot. A royal straight flush. And that's how you win. Since then, what has happened? It has lurched between left and right. It's been unsure as to what it actually stood for. You see that play out, obviously, in the seesawing between leaders, the bizarre situation where you have Kevin Rudd, nominally from the right, going to the polls, I must say, in 07, assuring people he's a fiscal conservative and getting the photo ops outside of church each Sunday morning, just to reassure everyone he's not going to frighten the horses. Then pursues a fairly left policy on climate change and asylum seekers. That spooks a couple of people in the party. Then there's the miners, whatnot. Julia Gillard, nominally from the left, then with the support of the right, rolls Kevin Rudd, goes to the polls, again, promising a conservative agenda, getting rid of the carbon tax and reinstituting offshore detention. But of course, because the party's so successfully eaten its own tail, it doesn't win majority government. It's forced into a coalition with the Greens. And because the party has wholeheartedly forgotten what it stands for and forgotten even how to keep a promise, it just throws out the whole kit and caboodle and does a new deal, whacks it, brings in a new carbon tax with the Greens. And of course, that's all she wrote. It's electoral poison ever since. You coincide this era with the rise of social media and particularly Twitter. I was actually trying to think to myself, I'm not sure that Labor has ever won a majority government since Twitter was invented. So just think about that. Think about who are the most active people on Twitter, what sort of image of the left and of Labor they are presenting to the public, which often sits quietly and watches in horror, if indeed they're watching at all. And that will tell you how successful that and appealing that ideology is. So all these things roll into this problem where Labor has become, Labor has deluded itself into thinking that it's an activist party whose base is the hard left. That's never been the case. The Labor Party is a mainstream party whose base is mainstream working class Australia, and somehow or other they've kind of forgotten that, and people who have tried to remind them of it have been shot down because I guess the nature of exposing extremists or calling out extremists or opposing extremists is you're going to get a pretty extreme reaction, and so people have been scared. Joel Fitzgibbon gets accused of everything under the sun, but fortunately he's got a pretty big pair of kahunas. And there are plenty of other people who are very scared that are talking about this behind the scenes, who know that the party needs to change or die.
I actually am loving this interview because it's such a tradie talk. We're getting Labor back to its tradie roots. Joe's in a singlet. I'm getting caught up in the moment. So, Pete, if you want to ask a question, I'm just going to go full into character and get a singlet on myself, and then we can really get into this right and proper.
Yeah, you can't just phone it in.
Yeah, he often just goes and does stuff in the middle of interviews, Joe, so don't worry about that.
Yeah.
So the next question I had for you, actually, so the divisions that the centre-left parties that we're facing around the world and Labor's facing are actually also the same kind of divisions that society as a whole is facing. You know, we have the sort of the elite half of society, as you say, obsessed with climate change and woke politics and stuff like that, and more ordinary people interested in the economy and, you know, their livelihoods and things like that. Why is it that why has society become more diverged? Why is that divergence growing? And is that a problem? And what can we do about it, I guess?
It is a very, very big problem. And I actually, believe it or not, was thinking about this just earlier today because I'm just obsessed with these matters and I think about them all the time. And I was wondering if we are not heading towards a political system that is not left and right, but high and low, and where you get where it's and I'll speak bluntly, but it'll become clear that I'm not speaking unkindly, but where it becomes sort of, you know, smart and stupid, or high intelligence or high information voters, which is often what the inner city left disgracefully refers to itself as, and low information voters or whatever. And I think that would be, as someone who came from a really, not a working class background, to be honest, but a welfare class background, raised by a single mum on welfare from Dandenong, oddly, very economically disadvantaged, but educationally, I felt very, very lucky because my dad, although he did leave, but I was still in contact. He went to uni in America, went to Harvard, actually, don't like to brag, but ended up becoming a folk singer. So it tells you everything you need to know about Ivy League. My mum was a teacher. We had a lot of books in the house. So I had that, you know, I'm not playing the poor me, you know, grew up in a log cabin I had to build with my own hands. But I do know economic disadvantage. Everyone around me was crippled by economic issues that simply people at the top of the tree never have to worry about. And again, this is the thing, climate change is very important, but it's much more important if you've got enough luxury to have, you know, to be able to worry about things in 30 years' time, because you don't have to worry about things in 30 days' time when the next mortgage comes in or mortgage payment comes in, or, you know, or you're just struggling to get by week to week. You know, I was just speaking to a bloke who was in a hospital in intensive care, and when he got discharged, he was going to be homeless. Now, got him looked after. The Salvos got him looked after. I was just the middleman, and I won't embarrass him, but tell that bloke that he's got to make some sacrifices because we won't meet our 2050 Paris targets or whatever. You know, like, unless people can understand that, and that people have much bigger problems on their plates, they're not going to realize that. So anyway, so going back to this thing. So there is nothing I find more sickening and elitist than the idea that you'll have all the smart, university-educated, affluent people on the top making decisions and making the same types of decisions because essentially they have the same information, and that being rational actors, they'll come to the same conclusions. And then you have all these, the lumpen proletariat at the bottom, the knuckle draggers, the blue collar mine workers who don't know that they're killing the planet, selfish bastards, and all that stuff, right? And I thought, oh my God, wouldn't that be just the worst? I mean, that sounds like a bad science fiction movie with, that sounds like sort of late Nicolas Cage, if you know what I mean. So, and then I realized, well, that's kind of what already happened and led us here. And it's kind of what happened when you had a duopoly of mainstream centre-left, centre-right parties that would essentially not really do anything that was particularly different from the others. And again, if you look at Hawke Keating and you look at Howard Costello, it's not that much in it. I mean, John Howard was there, backing in all the Hawke Keating government's economic reforms because he knew that they were necessary, because he knew that these things sort of had to happen. And for people who got left behind, they were saying, hang on a minute, now both sides, who do I turn to when both sides are selling me out? And again, I hate populist hard right and populist hard left politics, but we have to understand it. We have to understand what's going on. And it's the same thing in America and Donald Trump, where we saw a whole bunch of people, particularly in 2016, we saw a whole bunch of people, the Midwest working class, white working class men, especially blue collar workers, flocked to Donald Trump because he was talking their language and he was going to save their jobs and save their factories. And Hillary Clinton was running around saying, hey guys, make me the first female president. I'm with her. Hey, they're all going, you. Like, you're meant to do something for me. I'm not meant to do something for you. At least Donald Trump is saying what he's going to do for me. He's going to make America great again so I can still have my job at the car factory. And you're going around telling me that I have to give you your place in history. And that, I think, is emblematic of how it ended up. So I think, I am a moderate, I am a centrist, and I'm very, very much capital C centre left. But if we do not connect with our people, poorer people, working class people who are really struggling, and I'll tell you one, the ones who are on the seats of their pants, who are really struggling, the really poorest of society, they are not the ones who are worried about pronouns or who are worried about Paris Accord targets or whatever. And they are meant to be the people that the left is taking care of. And frankly, no, that they have been forgotten. And they've been forgotten by the party that's supposed to be taking care of them. And in many ways, they were probably forgotten before then, when politics at the top was more rational and the metronome kind of ticked and tocked back between centre-left and centre-right. But eventually there were enough of these people who felt left behind that you had these tectonic shifts in the US with Donald Trump, obviously. We know what happened there. In the UK with Brexit, where, again, people weren't voting on, multilateral trade deals with Belgium. People were just saying, hey, I'm here. You've forgotten about us. You're going around, you're going to, swanning around Brussels and going to your little cocktail parties and talking in all this fancy language about what we have to do and, why the fish I catch have to be so long or whatever it may be. And I'm here struggling to put food on my family's dinner table. And I just want to just flip you the bird. I just want to tell you to get, and that's what happens when you lose touch. So I think we were in danger of, as you were talking about, James, that we were going from that kind of vertical society, which is, probably sounds enlightened to some people. Well, then we'd all just sign up to we'd all just have climate change targets, and these silly, stupid people, these low information voters who don't know anything about climate change, wouldn't even have a say. And you know what? That's actually kind of where we were, that led to this revolution. And the revolution has sort of broken off in kind of two directions. It's broken off in one way to a traditional working class voter who has gone off to the populist right, often against their own interests, and then a hardcore university-educated ideological left kind of voter/activist who in fact represents an incredibly affluent and privileged sector of society. So the left and the right have kind of flipped into this sort of, twisted double helix that doesn't really make sense anymore. And I think we need to untangle it, and we need to call a spade, and Labor needs to decide, all right, well, who are you with? Do you want to go to the inner west dinner parties and talk about how woke you are? Or do you want to go out to the coal mines and say to these workers, you're going to save their jobs? And if you can't save their jobs, then you're going to die by their side, finding them new jobs in their local communities that they themselves will get. And this is another problem with I hear time and again with the climate debate say, oh yes, but for every one job we lose in Cessnock, we'll get 2 jobs in solar power or whatever. That may be, that's great. But unless it's the bloke losing the job in Cessnock who gets the new job, that's not much good to him, is it? So there's, if you want to rock up to the mouth of a coal mine at knock-off time, say, hey guys, look, good news and bad news. The bad news is you've all been fired, but the good news is we've created twice as many jobs looking after a battery in Adelaide. If anyone wants to volunteer for that job, be my guest.
Yeah, sweet. You brought up America before, and that's because these tensions in Labor, they haven't been coming up overnight. As you say, they've been there for a while, but they seem to reach a critical point, especially for Joel Fitzgibbon, now that Biden's become president, because the Labor Party here in Australia seems to think that this Biden victory is a big sign that people are starting to accept progressive politics all over the world, and that's why we should embark on our agenda. But I don't think that's true, because Biden wasn't supposed to just win. He was supposed to crush Trump, and he didn't, and nor did the Democrats. So I'm not exactly sure that's the lesson you get from the US. What do you reckon the lessons are?
Look, that is certainly what the Labor left are trying to say. I would not defame the whole of the party, and certainly not the Labor right for thinking that. Certainly, and again, Joel Fitzgibbon certainly doesn't think that. He's last time I checked, he was the national convener of the Labor right, I think. Another mate of mine who is a veteran Labor strategist, when he heard this idea being put around, his head nearly blew up, and he just started sending me this barrage of text messages, which I carefully removed all the F-bombs from, and then put in
then
my
you'll read them
column.
out.
If you actually look at what happened, it is absolutely not true. Yes, Joe Biden won a very high popular vote. That was on the back of California and New York, which simply doesn't matter at all. In those heartland states, in those Midwest states, it was an incredibly close run thing, and looked very, very close for a very long time. And the fact that Donald Trump could simultaneously be accused of killing 250,000 people through his, lunacy over COVID-19, it could be accused of being the most sexist, racist, illegitimate, foul, misogynist man ever to walk the face of the earth. He had his own family members lining up to character assassinate him, and he still won Florida. And he scored big increases in minority votes, big increases in the black vote, big increases in the gay vote, the Latino vote. Again, interestingly enough, a lot of those white working class voters who got him in 2016, they went back to Joe Biden. But the minorities who the left of the Democrats claimed to represent and claimed to speak for, they did not. They went away. They went away to Donald Trump. And again, this is further proof that a black person speaking in New York or California about these sort of lofty issues of I saw that incredibly condescending video that Kamala Harris put out, describing to stupid workers the difference between equity and equality or whatever, because the people they're helping might be too stupid to even know they're helping. So we put it in a little cartoon video. I thought that was nauseatingly condescending. I'm pretty sure that doesn't resonate, again, with low-income workers who often black workers who are really struggling. I think there's a big gap between black men and black women and how they vote as well, and how they feel about certain issues. And and again, for working people who are struggling on the breadline, that sort of just doesn't cut through. But that is what the East and West Coast elites of America keep talking about. The Green New Deal is not going to resonate with someone who again, is sweeping streets, cleaning toilets, driving buses. So the fact that this guy was the most vilified bloke in probably all of human history, had everything thrown at him, was told every day for the last 6 months he had the blood of 250,000 people on his hands, and he still won the second highest popular vote in US election history. Now, people voted against Trump for all different reasons. There were literal card-carrying communists voting against him. There were moderate big city Republicans voting against him. Why didn't, if this was so much of a landslide for Biden, why didn't he win the Senate? Where did all those votes go? Why did they go backwards in the House of Representatives? There are a lot of people who were double dealing, didn't like Trump but still voted Republican. That's clear in the results. And again, if you can't get a landslide against the person you have painted Donald Trump to be, then that is a very big problem. The task they've now set themselves is that every single presidential candidate, if Trump comes back in 2024, what are they going to do? They're going to have to get a record vote again to beat him, because there's 70 million just Trump votes out there. There are people voting against him for a whole bunch of reasons. There were more than 70 million people who voted just for him. And a lot of them are the minorities and working class people that the Democrats are supposed to be the party representing. And that is a very, very big problem.
So, Joe, you did mention it briefly there, that this idea that the centre-right parties like the Republicans and obviously the coalition here in Australia, and it's an idea that's been talked about heaps since the election, but also before then, about this idea that those parties will become multiracial, multi-ethnic, working-class parties, or at least partly that. Are you worried about that? Do you think that's likely, or do you think that's a talking point? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think it is very interesting. I think there will be. I think the first thing is that Labor needs to make a place for people who are socially conservative and economically aspirational. So it needs to respect people's religious and cultural traditions. Frankly, you've got, ironically, you've got a wing of the party that says, all right, we should just let every single asylum seeker come in from wherever they are, and anyone who doesn't like it is racist or Islamophobic or whatever, blah, blah. But if these people actually express their religious or cultural beliefs, so like, oh no, you're a racist, sexist, homophobe. And it's very rare that you'll find these people brave enough to do it to someone who actually holds these beliefs, such as, for example, the huge number of migrant communities and suburbs that voted no in the same-sex plebiscite. But they'll use they'll find, they'll comb through the white pages till they find a Caucasian white straight male that they can pin it on, and then Four Corners will do a yarn on them. So you don't. So the fact of the matter is that these groups are being alienated. Now, I am a yes voter. I've supported same-sex marriage, but that does not mean that I think anyone who still has a traditional view of marriage or thinks that marriage should remain as it used to be, I don't think they're a homophobe. I don't think they're a horrible person. I don't think that's hate speech. And yet you have, again, as we saw last week, and I thought it was pretty disgraceful, as I made clear, but you saw this incredible hit job, this out-and-out character assassination on someone's personal, private, and historic behaviour, dating back, about a quarter of a century, I think. He got drunk in public when he was at uni, went on a pub crawl, spare me. Or was caught snogging someone, a consensual adult in the corner of a bar. And exposing all this and crucifying them for that was okay because they voted no or supported the no case in the same-sex marriage debate. Now, that is not something I think that any mainstream party can ever support. That way of thinking that, we can say, and this is my belief, and I think this is probably where the party will sort of end up, hopefully, if it, comes to its senses. But let's say, well, look, the Labor platform is we support the right to same-sex marriage. We support same-sex couples' right to get married. But we understand that you've got Catholics, you've got Greek Orthodox, you've got Muslims, Jews, all of whom might not hold that view. Even just people who, everyday run-of-the-mill people who, thought they were agreeing with Labor's policy as it was 10 years ago and suddenly woke up to find out if they supported Labor's last policy when it was in government that they were now horrible homophobes. We say, you know what, that's okay. We don't think you're bad. We just think you're old-fashioned, or you believe in tradition, or you've got your family's cultural and religious traditions. That's fine. We still want you in the party, and we still want to hear from you. We still think you belong here because there's a bunch of other things that you believe in and care about that we will help make sure you get. Believing in, being religious should not be a hate crime in the Australian Labor Party. It was a party that was basically founded by Catholics for Catholics, and the notion that to be Catholic now is tantamount to being, 1 degree of separation away from a pedophile enabler or being horribly homophobic or whatever is simply, firstly, it's a great way to alienate a huge section of the population, and it's also just morally repugnant.
All right, I think we've got the handbook to get Labor back on its feet. So Joe Hildebrand, check him out, all News Corp websites, and follow him on Twitter. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much, guys. Absolute pleasure. Solidarity.
Solidarity.
Thanks, mate.
Okay, we now welcome back onto the show Sky News contributor and WA resident Caroline Di Russo. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me back.
All right, so we want to talk to you because West Australia's hard border closure is back in the news. There was the story over the weekend that off the back of what's now, at the moment of this interview, is I think 15 cases in South Australia, 15 new cases, 13 of which in one family. Western Australia changed their policy to say anyone that comes into West Australia from South Australia needs to be quarantined, which then affected a plane full of people that left South Australia thinking, once I get into Western Australia, I'm free to go wherever I want. They're told the second they land, actually 2-week quarantine. So I guess first question is, is Western Australia ever going to be fully open to the rest of Australia just in our lifetimes?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I feel like I've been railing against this borders thing since about June. Look, I think we will eventually. We have an election in March. So I feel like to politely call it a cautious approach will probably be taken till at least March because, look, it's just the politically expedient thing to do. West Aussies, they love the border. It's been very popular up until this point. And look, probably from about maybe late August, we started to see a little bit of a change in attitudes. People starting to say, okay, we see the rest of the country starting to open up. We need to start to get with the program. We just need to be a bit careful. And as you guys know, our border restrictions were reduced as of the 14th of November, which is 2 days ago. And we didn't even get 24 hours in. And of course, that policy is now changed already. So, look, I think it will. But for the time being, I don't think there's going to be anything too risky in that sort of policy simply because there's so much political capital has been in the borders.
That's interesting that you mentioned the amount of support they've got for borders over there in WA. Of course, that's one of the driving force, or if not the driving force behind it. Now, we know they've been popular. Is the mood shifting with stuff like this? Are people getting sick and not being able to see their relatives? Are people getting upset?
Yeah, it is. And look, a couple of things first. When we talk about the popularity, one of the polls, the 91% poll, that was like 837 people surveyed. So, there's 2.8 million West Australians. So, okay, it's a sample, but it's not statistically significant. And I don't know to what extent you can call that, real fundamental polling. But anyway, that there has been the number bandied around for a very long time. But even the news poll, as we've seen it, he's still been popular. We have seen news poll peg back his popularity a little bit. And people have finally realised that, most of the country has it, well, apart from what's happened in South Australia the last couple of days, the country has it under control. Victoria, you guys, there was a little bit of a governmental belly flop there for a little while, but you've pegged it back. And remember, New South Wales has managed to get through all of this without closing its border, save to Victoria. They've had plenty of outbreaks and they've got them under control. People have been travelling around. People have been coming in from New South Wales. So West Aussies have been saying, okay, the rest of the country seems to be able to be managing this. Why haven't I been able to see my relatives for 9 months? Or FIFO workers haven't seen, there's some people who haven't seen their kids since February. It kind of gets to the point where you're like, okay, we need to start to manage this. We need to start to get to deal with it, because we cannot live in this bubble forever. And probably from late August, it has been moving. And I think that's ultimately why that policy was changed, towards the end of last month for the restrictions to be eased as at the middle of this month, because I think they finally realised that people weren't going to put up with that level of restriction any longer.
So you mentioned before that a lot of Western Australia's border policies, because there's an election coming up in March. Now, Scott Morrison has been saying for a while, like, by Christmas, full country, we're open. And I guess today kind of explodes that idea. I mean, South Australia is cut off from Western Australia now, as well as Queensland. Do you reckon Scott Morrison's going to get his wish?
It should still be able to happen. And the reason being is, coronavirus became a domestic issue for us in March. If between March and now, state governments have not been able to put in place processes to be able to manage that, the tracking and tracing and what have you, then really the question needs to be asked of the state governments, why aren't you ready to deal with this? Here's an example from WA. In the last few months, we have experienced record ambulance ramping. Okay, so October was a higher ambulance ramping number of hours than in the middle of the flu season in 2019. So you've got a West Australian government that is like, look, we're going to close the borders, we're going to keep everyone safe, but they haven't done anything to be able to put us in a position to be able to manage the virus, because the easy, lazy policy is to just close the border and kind of hope for the best. So as far as West Australia is concerned, no, I don't think Scott Morrison's going to get his wish. And to be honest, WA was never on board with that anyway. As far as the other states go, I think there's a better chance of that happening depending on how quickly South Australia are able to manage this and get it under control. Then that there will show the rest of the country how ready they are to manage the virus. We already know New South Wales is able to do it because they've done it. Crossroads, and there's other examples of outbreaks they've been able to bring under control. We need to understand the standard in the other state governments, because that there will ultimately inform how we move forward from here.
Yeah, you could definitely see, certainly here in Victoria, the capabilities of the governments. You want them to be able to improve over time. Like it's difficult to believe that certain aspects of this haven't been able to improve since March. But you
guys have got some extra fax machines and stuff, don't you?
Yeah, yeah.
You've got extra fax machines. I think they went from like 10 to 20 extra whiteboards. So you guys are all set to go. It's all sweet. Exactly right.
Now, so in these national cabinet meetings, WA became famous for saying, "Nah, we're not going to do that." Is there any other reason that McGowan was holding back so much apart from just popularity? And how did that play with the people when he was sort of saying no to the rest of Australia?
That's kind of a little bit difficult to say exactly. I suppose the big part of it for the WA government and for the WA economy is being able to protect the mining industry. So that there was probably the number one consideration. It's a big employer, it's a big export, and obviously with Brazil being in shutdown, the iron ore price has gone through the roof. So, I think the government was really particular about protecting that industry because, if coronavirus got into the mines and the mines had to close, then there's a whole raft of issues that come off that. And I think a lot of people were pretty on board with that in the early days. Because it is such a major part of our economy. I just think that over time, people have now come to realise and come to understand that coronavirus isn't going away. And yes, there's been announcements that, potentially a vaccine is going to be brought forward and it's meant to be quite effective and all those sorts of things. But there's still a massive lag on a vaccine. So we can't just hide here. And the big problem with the WA economy is because mining has been so strong and a lot of other things have been suffering, you have that real two-speed economy here. And I think there's just been so much government largesse that we haven't felt that yet. I don't know what the September figures were, but in August in WA, we saw another 3,200 applicants go on to JobKeeper. So they keep telling us the economy's fine, but then why are more people going on to JobKeeper? Why are more people going on to JobSeeker? So I think it's one of those things that's going to come out in the wash. At the moment, people haven't really felt the consequences of it as hard yet, so they've been more supportive of it.
What gets me about Premier Mark McGowan is that the whole time at the start of the lockdowns, it was we're just doing the border closures on health advice. We're guided by the health advice. And then now that the health advice is starting to start open up, I mean, my favourite personal excuse was what was it? Other states were pressuring Western Australia to open its borders so Western Australian tourists would flood east and spend their money elsewhere. I mean, this guy's running out of reasons to keep it other than just, it's popular and I'm economically protectionist. So is this just like this 9-month-long power trip for this guy?
Yeah, pretty much. Well, it hasn't been a 9-month-long power trip. It's been a power trip since 2017. It's just, we're over here and he did it a little more quietly, I suppose, and not on the national stage. But when there was the original federal court hearings on the Palmer Challenge, our state chief health officer actually said that for states where there's no community transmission, there was a less than 1% chance of coronavirus returning to Western Australia. So that was July. Why has nothing happened between, say, July and November to try and reduce those border restrictions? And you're right, he did come out with comments like that. I did a podcast with Gideon and we were both just totally just gobsmacked that a premier would even say something like that, which is openly economically protectionist, but he clearly felt that he could get away with it.
That's extraordinary, that 1% figure. I hadn't heard that before. That's when you're weighing up proportionate risks and costs and stuff like that, it's crazy that they could come up with a decision like that. All right, one more from me, Caroline. Now, this is a little bit different to just coronavirus. We've seen, WA's always had the strongest separatist streak, right, of all the Australian states, and we've seen that ramp up a lot throughout the COVID thing. I know there's polls and stuff, but is there actually many people on the ground in WA? And we know that WA has to pay, they're an economically successful state, they have to pay for other states who aren't as economically successful. Are there actually many people on the ground that would legitimately prefer it if WA left Australia?
There are some people, and we have always had that bent a little bit. We almost didn't become part of the Federation. Then in 1933, we were like, woohoo, let's have a referendum and leave. And it's one of the few referendums which we actually voted yes to. We've managed to say, but I guess maybe it's a product of our isolation and in a sense in recent times because of our economic success that West Australians, do have that idea that we're better off on our own. And I've had quite a few people say to me, oh, well, we're net 200 billion in our favour. Why are we part of WA? I'm like, awesome. Well, let's set up our own customs. Let's set up our own, border protection. Let's set up all those other federal institutions which, form part of what we already have. And then, then tell me whether we're net 200 billion in front.
Yeah, I certainly hope that Western Australia stays where it is, because when I like to, switch that light thing on, I do like when the light comes on, which I think I'd have to say goodbye to very quickly. Now, certainly one place or institution in Western Australia that's really pushing this West Australia separatism is this West Australian, because when Mark McGowan famously said no to the National Cabinet idea of open borders, the West Australian next day puts out that it's our West Australia Day and this new Independence Day movement. Yeah. First up, what was going on with that? And please, is that like the best they could come up with as a name for the national holiday? And then second, what do you make of the media coverage of Mark McGowan through all this? He seems to be getting away with literally everything.
Yeah, he really has been for the most part. Look, the West Australian, let's just again politely call it, has been incredibly favourable to this government, and I'm not going to make any insinuations or any comment as to why. I mean, this is not the first time that the West Australian has very strongly supported a premier in this state. They generally tend to, well, not generally, but they have in the past picked up a horse, so to speak. So for me, that's not particularly unusual. There are some exceptions. And even within the West Australian itself, there's occasionally an article that is, slightly unhelpful to the government. But, guys like Nathan Hondros, Ollie Peterson, Gareth Parker, they either publish for other publications, and then obviously Gareth and Ollie are on 6PR, and they do a lot of talkback. So they work the Premier and the government and its policies pretty hard. Within the West Australian itself, it's a pretty smooth ride most of the time. But then, I ask people, I actually don't know anyone who owns a subscription to the West Australian. So there becomes that question of what is the actual influence versus the perceived influence. So that there's the second part to that. So yes, they're very favourable, and that they obviously do have some level of influence, but I don't think it's as huge as everyone would like to have us believe.
Caroline Di Russo, thank you so much for your time.
Anytime, guys. My pleasure.
Thank you to Joe and Caroline for those interviews. We'll now go through some stories that made us laugh this week. Now, this one is doing quite the rounds in America at the moment, and it is a very funny story because we might not be defunding the police for much longer. Here's the story. So there is a councilwoman in Portland, Oregon, which is one of the most left-wing places you can find in the US, and she is big on the idea of defunding the police. She became famous around America for saying that most 911 calls are fake anyway, so why do they need this much funding? And maybe she only thought that because she happens to make some phone calls that are fake. So she went viral this week because the 911 call that she made, the audio of which went out, and basically she called 911 on a Lyft driver because she was in a Lyft, Lyft being, basically another service like Uber. She was in an Uber/Lyft, and the Lyft driver wouldn't roll up the windows of the car, presumably because he's scared of COVID. And she got so angry that they started an argument. He pulled over and said, "Get out of my car." She said, "I'm not getting out of the car in this neighborhood." He said, "If you don't get out of my car, I'll call the police." She says, "Okay, if you want to call the police, I'll do it for you." Then she's calling the police because I don't actually know. Why did the police get called?
She called the police. She was like, "You have to make this guy... It's illegal for this guy to kick me out of the car, and he has to call me a replacement driver." And they said it's not illegal because it's his car, and only. I thought there
was a replacement driver as well.
Well, they said only you can order a replacement driver. That's how Lyft works. Like, they actually explained to her how Lyft works. With the Windows thing though, he had them down because it's Lyft requirements. As part of his requirements as a Lyft driver to fight COVID, he had to have the windows down.
Oh right, okay.
It wasn't even his choice.
It wasn't even his. That is defund the police.
And okay, so
you can't be doing that if you run on defund the police.
She, literally a few days before this, had an amendment up on the Portland Council, or whatever it's called, for $18 million to be reallocated from Portland Police to the community, whatever that means. Police
the community into research and development of lifting up windows.
Yeah,
how much of a threat is it?
And COVID spread. So that was knocked back. And she said, move past the fear and stretch ourselves to take the action that is demanded. So, why don't you move past the fear, Joe?
Yeah.
It was crazy. And I just don't understand. Does she just lie all the time? Should she just say things she doesn't mean constantly?
This is literally the first I'm hearing of her. I mean, I heard about the most 911 calls are fake, and now I'm hearing about this. So I don't really have a whole long line of knowledge on which to draw upon with her, but certainly on this case, that is hilarious.
Yeah, so he ended up calling the police and she had to get out. But like if she calls on them to defund the police all the time and then for nothing at all, just to get someone in trouble, she calls the police, then that must mean she lies constantly. But anyway, it's a great story. Check it out. It's really funny. Later in the week, she ended up blaming it on white supremacy and the patriarchy.
Yeah, but it's too late.
Which of course she would.
If she brought it up on the 911 call, it might have been like, okay, this is what I thought at the time, but now that's just post facts. This is why I was right. It's like when you get in an argument with someone and you're telling someone else about it and they're like, I think the other person might be right. They're like, no, but you should have heard what he said, and then you just start making things up to make yourself look better.
Man, I can't imagine ever doing that, James. But yeah, no, I'll try and work it out. I think she was worried. She was saying that there were white supremacists driving around Portland, which I find hard to believe. But
all right. Shall we move on?
What are we doing? Beverly Hills?
Sure. So this was another one that came out of the US. So basically, this county by county look at where Californians voted, and it is an absolute sea of blue in Los Angeles, as you'd imagine, except for these three really, but I want to hone in on two here. These two side by side red dots in a sea of blue, which happen to make up Beverly Hills. Now, that seems to be a little weird for me. You would think the most, in the middle of California, middle of Southern California, the elite rich, that would be as Biden country as it possibly can be. But they voted red.
They did. Around them, there were lots of places that voted for Biden, like Bel Air and stuff. But yeah, there was in Beverly Hills these two places. I'm sort of heartened by that. That's like a little sort of cohort in Brunswick saying we should build a Darnie, which I guess that's what I was when I lived there. Or someone in Surrey Hills in Sydney, to use an NSW reference, saying that unconscious bias is, a fairy tale.
I think it's more when you may take a very positive view of it. I think it's more people going like, oh, when I said eat the rich, I didn't mean me.
Yeah.
I think that seems to be the overriding vote. Don't
take my stuff, as Andrew Bushnell said on the company Slack during the week. So that's your take. You're saying that this is just a bit of hypocrisy. Oh, you're not happy
These are
with it at
people
all?
realizing if you sacrifice others to the beast, it doesn't mean it won't eat you last.
I think this is just the start, James. I think in a few years, this is the start of the cultural revolution in a good way.
Yep. Are young and naive, Pete, not withered by the world.
All right. So, have you got any more on that, James, or not?
No, that was it. So we also, there was this image that did the rounds here in Australia of Malcolm Turnbull. I think it's at the Four Corners, then into Q&A thing. But anyway, it is a photo of Malcolm Turnbull in a green room doing his favourite thing of staring lovingly at a TV image of Malcolm Turnbull.
For those, we'll chuck it up on the screen for those watching on YouTube. It's an unfortunate photo for Malcolm. It's like he does look quite transfixed. Like he's just like, there he is, like looking at the screen as he says the thing that he already knows what he says. It's an unfortunate for someone like him who's famous for having a really high opinion of himself. You can just see him sort of nodding, going, I couldn't agree with me more here.
I'd agree with you that it was a gotcha moment, except for the fact that he was watching it on a loop for 2 straight days before that photo was taken. So, I do think he was asking for the attention eventually.
I don't think he can sort of say this is a gotcha moment, given he was watching 57 minutes of a gotcha, report.
And the fact he's still watching it. Yeah. You can go to that room, he's still there. He hasn't moved.
What is... has he commented on this, James? I couldn't find anything.
No, he's still watching. He's
okay.
He's blissfully unaware. You know what's going to happen, though? He's going to read an article about this, and then we'll get the photo of him looking at a photo of him looking at a photo of him.
Yeah.
It's just going to be one of those, I don't even know what they call it, like a babushka doll of just different Malcolm Turnbulls looking at Malcolm Turnbull.
Well, there's an opportunity for a young entrepreneur out there to release a range of Malcolm Turnbull babushka dolls. So, James, are we right to move on to my final thing?
Yes.
The final story. Now, I'll give you this one. This is, as I mentioned at the top of the show, one of my favourite facts about the world. North Thurston Public Schools in Washington State in the US created controversy during the week when they removed Asian students from the students of colour category in a report they put out because Unfortunately, it seems like high-achieving students of Asian background were not giving them the results they wanted to get with regards to disparities between white students and students of colour. So basically, they had this graph where it was illustrating the growing disparity between white students and students of colour. However, the white students category had white students / Asian students and then students of colour in the other line. And usually, of course, Asian students get counted in the students of colour. So... And this leads me to one of my favourite facts about the world, which makes it so difficult to justify this idea that Australia or America or any other country, well, not even any other country, but countries like Australia and America are beset by white supremacy, is the fact that students of Asian background and Indian background in the United States do better at uni, make more money, go to better schools, and it's, how does that, clearly that flies in the face of this idea that we are living in a white supremacist society. So that's why I love this story. James.
I just want people to, people from minority backgrounds to know that the far left will always be there for you until you start being successful. And then they will drop you like a bad smell and they will move on to someone else.
Whatever you do, don't start doing well.
Yeah, that's the worst thing you can do for them. The second you stop being victims, they will run from you and forget you even existed and even portray you as the enemy that they're fighting against and trying to get people to enroll from school. All right, that is it for the show this week. Thank you to Joe Hildebrand and Caroline Di Russo. Check out Joe Hildebrand on news.com.au. Check out Caroline on Sky News. Thanks to everyone listening. If you are listening through Apple Podcasts, if you could leave us a review, that really helps us, grow the show, send it out to new people. But the best way to grow the show is for you out there to tell friends and family that you know that like politics and would like to hear from us about the show. Tell them where you can download. They can download this show wherever they want. We're not the only podcast that the IPA is doing. We've got Looking Forward coming out every week. We've got Viral Banter coming out every 2 weeks. A bunch of really fun episodes of 5 Favourite Books is on the horizon, which I'm really looking forward to listening to. And then back in the vault, you've got Australia's Future, John Roscombe and Tony Abbott talking about how to protect Australia's culture. I mean, big step back this week now that South Australia looking back in lockdown, so it's a really good time to revisit those discussions. And Great Books and Literature podcast and all these other stuff that we're doing. So, go listen to those. And if you like what we've been talking about and you're not already a member of the IPA, head on over to ipa.org.au/join. Really affordable memberships. Become part of Australia's biggest voice for freedom. And we'll see you guys next week.
I would just like to make the point, James, that when you say tell your friends about the Young IPA podcast, the Young IPA podcast actually makes a great birthday or Christmas present. It's free and you'll provide this person with 50 hours entertainment a year. So think about it.
So do you say your Christmas present is, hang on, can you hand over your phone and tell me your passcode for a second?
That's it.
Yeah,
50 hours of entertainment a year.
Prepare the pitch in your head before that, because you don't want to come in half-baked with that idea, because they're not going to like it. All right, that is it. See you guys next week.
See ya.